What would it do for you and your family to make 6 figures in the next 12 months? How would that make you feel? But some remain vulnerable.
So what do they learn in the training?
There is a solution. Self-reliance is a core value of being an American. Once you learn how to make 6 figures listing luxury homes, your world changes. No boss, your own schedule. It's empowering.
12 sessions, 6 figures, 12 months. What would it do for you in your life? How would that make you feel?
Once you learn how to thrive on your own, life becomes a lot more fun.
Yeah!
Welcome back to the training, everybody. How to make 6 figures in 12 months selling real estate starting from scratch. This is week 8, the art of negotiation. The art of negotiation. We're going to discuss becoming the center of the storm, the real purpose of negotiating, some negotiating styles and attributes. We're going to discover the definition of a successful negotiation, and most importantly, understand the 4 key elements of negotiation. As a real estate agent, negotiating is an absolutely critical skill. We negotiate every day one way or another, and professional negotiators use correct dialogues and have the correct mindset. We will discover both of those today. For you veterans, you know this very well. For you new agents, understand this. Escrows often go sideways. The reason is clients are dealing with often what is their largest asset. They can become very emotional. Many agents on the other side of the table are not that skilled. So you need to be the center of the storm. Never get too excited, never too upset. Let's review the attributes of effective negotiators. They always stay centered. They are not reactive. They keep their emotions in check. They know how to create allies and advocates on the other side of the table. They're good listeners. They are thick-skinned and understand the whole concept of letting the other side vent. They take the high ground and know how to rise above. They can inspire others to see the larger perspective. There are times when we just need to let the other side vent. Poor negotiators react to venting. Skilled negotiators artfully let negative energy be released. They sit there and say nothing. They know at the right time to move back into the conversation.
So to become a successful negotiator, it's very helpful if we dissect the negotiation a bit. And there are 4 key elements to a negotiation. There's the people, of course. You're negotiating with someone else across the table, so to speak. There's the interests. We'll talk about those in a second. Options, or a variety of ways to solve the negotiation or reach a successful conclusion. And if it needs to be based on some objective criteria, to identify what that criteria is. So in summary, people, interests, options, and criteria. But let's talk about these a little bit further. One of the big breakthroughs to be a successful negotiator is for you to separate the people from the problem. In the vast majority of negotiations that go sideways, negotiators tend to combine the problem with the other side as people. The way to do this successfully is to basically recruit the other side to partner with you as a problem solver and then face the problem together. We can talk about that in a physical way. When you're in a conference room negotiating and there's a problem, Sometimes it's beneficial for you to sit side by side with the person you're negotiating with and put the problem on the table between you. So in other words, there's the problem, we're working on this together. Separate the people from the problem. Interests as opposed to positions. So what's a position? A position is, this is what I want, right? That kind of attitude. But what is missing in most negotiations is identifying what interests are being served by both parties. We'll talk about some dialogue to help you do that. Options. You want to invent as many options, creative solutions, brainstorming solutions to reach a successful conclusion. And when there's some criteria that needs to be objective, you need to agree on what that might be. Market value or other factors related to price possibly. So these are the four components we rarely even identify, much less think about. And this will take you a long way in becoming a really skilled center of the storm type negotiator.
Let's take a look at the process of a successful negotiation. Before trying to reach agreement, be creative, invent some options for mutual gain. Stage 1 is the analysis. Gather information, organize it, think about it, brainstorm. Number 2 is the planning stage. How do you plan to deal with the 4 key elements of a successful negotiation? The people, interests, options, and criteria. There is the discussion stage. There are differences in perception of the 4 key elements, and you should discuss those with the other side. One of the most effective ways to do that is ask the other side, what interests are they trying to serve as opposed to their position? It's very important for you to understand, particularly in complex negotiations, that you need to reach a gradual consensus. These things can take time. The first key element of a negotiation is the people. Are you paying enough attention to the people? There's 2 interests, substance and the relationship. The relationship tends to become entangled with the problem. Where the perceptions of the other side are inaccurate, you can look for ways to educate without being condescending. If emotions run high on the other side, you can find ways to let off steam or let them vent. Where misunderstandings exist, you should work to improve communications.
So it's helpful to start to observe and recognize styles of negotiating on the other side of the table, because you need to be strategic in your approach. And so if we can drill down and start analyzing the other side a little bit, starting with the first conversation, we can start to categorize them a little bit and think ahead of how we're going to deal with them. There are basically 2 substyles of confrontational you're going to run into. What we call the ego alpha male or female, or the Soviet style. Soviet style is a very rough style of negotiating when you're up against it, which is not win-win, it's win-lose. They're constantly in the mindset that somebody has to win. There has to be a total winner and a total loser. That's a Soviet style negotiator. We'll talk about each of these styles, individually here in a minute. There's a collaborative type of style that you can come across, the people pleaser and earnest and honest, or we call Honest Abe, that comes after Abraham Lincoln. And then you've got 4 styles that could be a combination of collaborative or confrontational: the engineer, the roller coaster, the clock watcher, or the tortoise. And it's not to say people have to fit exactly in one category, but I think once you start to understand these styles, you'll recognize, or you'll remember times when you were in negotiations with clients or other folks and you came up against people that acted this way. So what we want to do today is start to dissect them, understand them, and develop some strategy for future negotiations.
The ego alpha must feel that they've won. They want to be the king of the hill, the A personality, but typically they're masking something underneath, which could even be insecurity. I should make a comment here. An alpha male or female is not necessarily bad. We are talking about an egocentric alpha male or female, and there's a big difference. The Soviet style comes from the Cold War. This style relates to winning at all costs. There's no win-win situation in the Soviet style. Your loss is part of their victory. They enjoy invoking pain and insults, and they will lie and deceive without hesitation. This is a very difficult negotiation for you if you run into a Soviet-style negotiator on the other side of the table. When you encounter a Soviet style, you need to move cautiously and play your cards close to the vest. Let's talk about some collaborative styles. One of them is the people pleaser. They seek to be loved, they hate conflict, they're often needy and insecure, they are just lovable people, and they tend to give up the farm. If your clients are people pleasers, you actually need to protect them because they are too vulnerable to being taken advantage of. They need your help. The Honest Abe style negotiating will give their best offer and mean it. They typically don't like to go back and forth a lot. They don't like splitting the difference. They're not lowballers. And if they feel deceived, they will just walk away from the table. Another trait of an Honest Abe, earnest and honest negotiating style is that they kind of reconcile what they think a fair deal is in their head for both sides. And that's what they want. Now we're moving into some sub-styles that could be collaborative or confrontational. The engineer. The engineer is analytical, very logical and methodical. They may process their emotions using logic. They tend to need to understand everything. Have you ever had a client that actually reads the entire listing agreement? If so, you have an engineer. Unfortunately, we run into these in our business quite often. The emotional roller coaster. They're all over the place. They tend to take things personally. They can be inconsistent. One day they're up, another day they're down, and they can turn on a dime. They could make negotiating quite a challenge. Sometimes you just have to let them vent and not take things so literally. And then we have Mr. or Ms. Clock Watcher. They're very impatient. They love to speed towards the goal. They have a very short attention span. They tend to want everything now. And know that a way to negotiate against them is to actually slow things down, and then they tend to open up because they just want it to be over with. They can also kill a deal quickly, so you want to be careful. And at last we have the tortoise. They are the slow and steady, patient people. Sometimes they just go silent. Speed will kill this type of negotiation. Sometimes they feel conflicted. Say the least you possibly can and let them run the pace of the negotiation. You basically have to acquiesce to their time frames. If you rush them and you push them, things will blow up. But if you can be patient with them, you can be successful. So you may be wondering, how do you discover the other side? Their style. Are they a tortoise or are they the engineer? Here's a great piece of dialogue that can start to flesh that out for you. In your past negotiations, what were your biggest concerns? What frustrated you the most about selling your last house? Their answers will start to reveal their style of negotiating. So let's move on from people to interests. Interests define the problem, not conflicting positions. The problem lies in the conflict between each side's needs, desires, concerns, and fears. And there very well may be compatible interests. A great agreement is often made possible precisely because interests differ. One side may need a large backyard, one side needs to reduce the maintenance burden. So you want to flesh out what their interests are, what interests are they trying to serve, and pay attention to making a distinction between a position and really what their interests are. So let's dive deeper into interests. Interests are based on human needs. And you may have taken a psychology course in school and seen the Maslow hierarchy of needs. This relates to interests, first of which is security and safety. Assuming survival is not an issue here, security and safety would be first and foremost. Economic well-being, then a sense of belonging or being loved, recognition, and then control over one's life, or what some refer to as self-actualization. So when you're negotiating with somebody, their true interests typically reside in one or more of these human needs. So when you're faced with a position that seems to be unmovable from the other side, you may want to ask something like this. I understand that's what you want, but could you tell me exactly why that's important to you? And you'll recognize that last piece of dialogue I just used from previous trainings. So they're saying a position, you want to know why that's important to them. We want to drill down to their motivations, their values, and in the case of negotiation, what interests are they truly trying to serve? Because if we know what their true interests are, we can be creative and possibly come up with other ways they can satisfy those interests that can help us as well. If you're negotiating in a conference room or a physical situation where there's a large table, I suggest you sit side by side with your opponent and put the paperwork in the middle such that you're framing the environment where you're working as a collaborator, both partnering to address the problem that sits between you in the middle. Let's take a look at a few major obstacles you need to be aware of. Rushing to premature judgment, searching for a single answer. In other words, not inventing creative options that can solve the problems and serve both parties' interests. The assumption that there's a fixed pie, and thinking that solving their problem is their problem, when in fact an effective negotiator understands that solving their problem is our responsibility as effective negotiators, and we're probably not going to get what we want until we solve their problem, or at least help them solve their problem. Which leads us to our next element of negotiation, inventing options. You want to be skilled at inventing solutions advantageous to both sides before dividing the pie. The classic example that you may have heard are the two kids that argue over an orange and then cut it in half. But then they discover that one wants to eat the fruit and the other wants to use the peel for a cake. So until you start exploring options and discovering what interests they're trying to serve, you may be trying to divide a fixed pie when it's not necessary. Slide 30, inventing options. Inventing options could also be termed brainstorming. You want to separate the acts of inventing options from judging them. Broaden the ideas. Wild ideas are encouraged because what sounds like a crazy idea initially may lead to a new idea that you wouldn't have discovered otherwise. You want to search for mutual gain and invent ways of making the decisions easy. Examples of objective criteria, the fourth element of negotiation, could be market value, replacement cost, construction cost, actual bids by legitimate licensed contractors, published professional standards, what is customary in the industry, or equal treatment or reciprocity. So, for example, in a real estate purchase contract, you may know that it's customary for both buyer and seller to split the costs of escrow. That would be something that's customary. It's important you understand the relationship between discovering what and why. For example, please tell me what you want and why in as much detail as you can. I want to understand your needs and not miss something. Does that make sense? And so with that little piece of dialogue, you're going to repeat back to them what they want. I understand that you want blank or X. Okay, great. So what will that do for you? And then you're going deeper to discover why they want X. And that will reveal their core values, their true interests, their motivations, and what they're trying to serve. So here are some fundamental negotiating phrases. And keep in mind that we always fall back to repeat, praise, acknowledge, and then ask the next question. That's what we call the RPA of negotiating, not to be confused with the residential purchase agreement. But so your RPA is repeat, then praise and acknowledge, something like, does that make sense? That's fairly common, I understand, etc. And then ask the next question. Collaboration, not compromise. We hear the term compromise a lot in negotiating. Essentially what that means is both parties giving up something. You should be focused on collaboration and discover interests to be served, not positions. We strongly advocate your interests, not positions, is where you should be focusing your time and attention. You want to work side by side as a collaborator with the other side of the negotiation to attack the problem in the center of the table, so to speak, and not each other. Here's some great advice for your negotiating skills. Never yield to pressure, only principle. Discover their styles and their true interests. Again, focus on the problems and recruit the people to be collaborative as problem solvers together in a partnership. You want to always be able to walk away from the table, so you need to create more leads. And it's a good idea to ask the other agent that represents the buyer or the seller what their clients are like to determine the negotiating style of what they're dealing with. A successful negotiation can be defined as a wise agreement that meets the legitimate interests of each side as much as possible while resolving conflicting issues fairly, is durable, and enhances the relationship between the parties. Notice that we've highlighted legitimate interests, conflicting issues, durable, and relationship. So here's your action list for week 8, the art of negotiation. Number 1, always work to separate the people from the problem. Number 2, identify interests as opposed to positions. And 3, invent options before deciding your next move. Slide 38, preview of week 9 lead generation. So here's a look forward and a preview of week 9 lead generation. We're going to take a look at both buyer and seller lead generation techniques, including buying internet leads, generating leads from social media, and beyond. We're also going to give you some great dialogue on converting internet leads, both buyer and seller. See you next week.